Summer is prime time for all those charity runs, rides, festivals, and challenges. With so many options and pleas for your hard-earned dollars, it can be tricky to know where to put your pledges. Joining us now with some advice on how to narrow down the options and understand how charities nudge you to donate more, Ann Rosenfield, principal at Charitably Speaking, and Nicola Lassatera, one of the chief scientists at Behavior Economics and Action at Rotman at the University of Toronto. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Before we start, Ann, what is Charitably Speaking?
Charitably Speaking is my blog and it's my small consulting firm, but it's really a way for me to talk outside of my formal employment as a charity employee, so I can talk more independently.
And Nico, we hear charity. What exactly is a charity?
Well, a charity is any organization, institution that collects money for several causes, essentially, through different strategies that they implement.
We're going to talk more about those strategies, but according to Statistics Canada, one of the reasons people give money to charity, the most popular responses were they felt compassion towards people in need, to help a cause in which they personally believed. Nico, are those the real reasons?
They certainly play a big role. I mean, people, let's say, need to feel that they're helping and that someone or some organization, some population is better off because of donations. There are many other reasons, many other motivations that researchers have found leading people to donate. So what we just mentioned are what we normally call pure altruism. All we care about is the welfare, the well-being of another person or population, cause, and so on. But sometimes there is also what we call, maybe it seems like it's a negative connotation, impure altruism. I prefer to call it warm glow. Something that makes us feel good about. I donate and I feel personally better about. And this has implications for what we should expect people to donate and how to advertise a particular, for example, donation campaign. Of course, we want to tell people donate to help such and such, but also donate to feel better with yourself. And also, it has an implication for how much I want to donate. For example, if I know that you donated a lot of money, say, maybe I don't feel compelled to donate that much because I know that your donation is helping someone, but maybe I want to be the one donating as well because that makes me feel good. So at the end of the day, we end up donating more just to make ourselves feel better, but we also help some people more.
Is there like a significant amount, a specific amount that you need to donate in order to get that warm glow?
I don't think there is any specific research about that, but maybe it doesn't have to be a lot, but definitely people like the idea of donating themselves rather than someone else, even if the effect is the same.
And I guess some people also donate because they do get tax breaks, right? Ann?
Well, interestingly, as Nico was just talking about, the warm glow, consistently, when you look at research, for the top reasons, people are motivated by religion, people are motivated by repayment, Canada's treated me well and I want to give back. People are motivated by this sense of really wanting to help our community. Tax reasons is very, very low on the list,
really?
Like number 6 and far below number 6. Where I see tax reasons having a big impact may be in the size of the gift or the type of the gift. So the person has decided they're going to give, but I definitely have observed that, for example, when there was the change in terms of gifts of securities and the capital gains tax, size of gifts I found, even at small social service charities, went up dramatically. As an example, I was working at a very small social service charity. We got our first $25,000 gift from an individual as a gift of securities. So tax reasons are, according to Statistics Canada and other research, a very low motivator, but they can influence the way in which the person gives and may also influence the size they're able to give.
Nico?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as we used to say, at the margin, it means something that you can save some money on your taxes, but I guess most donations are also of very small amounts, so at the end of the day, it's not going to make such big of a difference. But definitely, it might affect how you donate and when to donate as well.
What about
businesses? I guess it's a little different because there are, the write-off may be bigger. But even in that case, I would say it's definitely not the only reason businesses do it. There are many others. there may be some specific will of the entrepreneur, the founder, the company, because they care about something, they want to give back. That's definitely a big reason. It's also a very powerful way of advertise your company, or even to diversify yourself from competitors, right? So there are some companies.
So it could be like a self-serving.
It could be self-serving, which again, there is nothing wrong with it to the extent that it also helps others. So if you buy, pair of shoes from my company, another pair of shoes goes to a poor kid in Latin America or somewhere else.
And what about legacy?
It's a nice thing, right?
I'm curious to know, because I know
Yes.
there's some people who do have a lot of money and they can donate, give away millions and millions of dollars because then they have a building with their name on it.
So the reasons people give are many and complex. Legacy is interesting because it can talk about things like a name on a building. There are just as many philanthropists I have met who will name the building maybe after another member of the family, maybe after a parent or a grandparent, because they actually don't want the high visibility. So there's a lot of motivations for why people give. But the other piece, which I think is also interesting, is people thinking about also as well their own legacy in terms of gifts in their will. That's an area that's very under-discussed in terms of charitable giving, but it's actually a quite substantial area for all of us. In Canada and the US, it varies from year to year, but it's about 4 to 7% of charitable gifts. So it's quite a large amount, but it's not something we really talk a lot about.
We've talked about why some people give. What are some of the reasons why others won't give to charity?
So people don't give to charity for a variety of reasons. So we've talked about I talked about people who are repayers. You're only talking, in terms of donations, according to Stats Canada, you're only talking about 20-ish% of Canadians who don't give anything to charity. So it's a relatively small group. Some people may feel that they don't benefit at all from charity. Some people may not be aware. When we talk about charity, people don't realize charities are as large as universities and hospitals. They are also as small as perhaps your local girls' soccer team. So I believe often people may not even realize that, even if their motivation is just, well, I don't get anything, so I don't feel that I need to contribute anything, they may not realize that there are charities touching their lives in lots of ways, or charities being a bit of that reserve fund, so that when you need blood, you certainly are going to be happy that Canadian Blood Services is there. When you maybe have a particular illness or disability, you're going to be glad that there are these various charities that can really help you with your cause, that have been doing research that may allow you to recover more quickly or lead a healthier life.
We should also mention that TVO itself is a charity.
Yes, you are.
And our mission is obviously to educate people through learning. Anyway, I'm also, something I see a lot, especially on social media, is Kickstarter. Does Kickstarter, something like Kickstarter, does that count as a charity, Nico?
Oh, that's a great question. There is some debate about it. So in principle, it's not, in the sense that you are some sort of investor, a very special investor into an initiative or something that people are trying to develop and so on, as well as another, what we call crowdfunding initiatives and platforms and so on. To a large extent, however, it ends up being some form of donation. Sometimes you get something else in exchange, like you get the product before others, for example. But yes, to a large extent, it looks very much like donations.
Do you think that it takes, when people give money to something like Kickstarter or a GoFundMe, that money is taken away from other charities?
I think the bigger question, I think that's an important question, and there is some research that says generally charitable giving is more closely tied to or correlates to the TSX. So when the TSX is high, people tend to give more, and when it's low, they tend to give less. So it seems to be more related to the economy. Interestingly,
really?
Yes. Interestingly, some research just came out last week from Giving USA. So it's looking at giving in the US in 2016, and giving went up by almost 4% in the US. And that's all that activity we're seeing, all those marches and all those efforts are really driving what is, for something that's fairly set in terms of relative to the economy, the amount of money people are giving. We're seeing in the US a 4% increase, and that's mostly $25 donations. Like, it's sort of a democratization of philanthropy. So customarily, I would say to you that sure, giving to a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter might decrease the pie a little bit. We're in an interesting time, and I'm not sure that some of the rules are still going to be applying, at least for now, with the current government we've got down south.
And Nico?
No, I mean, the issue of substitution that you're raising is important. It's probably broader than just related to crowdfunding. Definitely, when I donate, you know, even sort of mentally, I might define a budget for how much I want to donate this year, say. And
do people actually think like that? Like they have a certain amount?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there is this whole theory in behavioral sciences about mental accounting. So I set some amount of money for, it could be charity, it could be, you know, clothes or groceries and so on, and I stick to it, even if it's not optimal at some point. Maybe I really want, I don't know, something to eat, but I already spent how much, you know, I set for today to eat, and so I don't spend it, which is not the best thing to do. But it applies to charity, for sure. And so I think there are two effects. One is the possibility of substitution, right, which is not necessarily optimal. So one case, I think, I don't know if it was what kind of crowdfunding platform, but someone said, I need some money to do a salad, right? And this person was looking for $25, I think, and they collected $20,000, right? So one might think, that's a waste of money. That $20,000 could have been used for something definitely more useful. But
also kind of like a mockery of the...
It becomes also a mockery on top of it, but at the same time, these platforms also attract a lot of interest. So so the pie gets bigger, right? And so maybe some slices are too big, but the whole pie of people interested in donating becomes so much bigger that at the end everybody benefits from it. So it's related to what you were saying. So more people, there is more interest, as you were saying, and so at the end of the day, the total amount of donations will go up anyway.
I think one of the issues, though, you need to think about in terms of these kind of crowdfunding campaigns, sure, there are absolutely, there's the case where they raise the $20,000. The thing I think you need to bear in mind is these are people putting themselves forward. So no one is checking the story. So someone can, and I'm not saying, you know, probably, you know, in every scale of the universe, there are one person that's an idiot and 999 people who are awesome, right? But no one's double checking those stories. Is that person really an impoverished university student? Is this person really a widow with 2 small children? Like, no one's double checking on that. No one's screening them in any way. So one of the things you just have to bear in mind, as is the case in any time you spend money, is how much information you have and how much accountability do you have. And so you just want to bear that in mind if you're thinking about giving to one of those kinds of efforts.
I want to follow up with how people can determine how to give money. But I want to just touch on something that you just said, because individuals might mislead the public as to where the money is going, but charities, like big organizations, have also kind of done that in the past. So how do you, is there like a body that regulates charity?
So charities are regulated, subject to regulations by Canada Revenue Agency. We're also subject to regulations under the Privacy Act. So we're subject to those 2 areas. I think one of the things to think about, though, when you think about those administrative costs, like, so how much of my money is going to the cause? A really good example of this is I had a colleague who was working for an international charity, and they were really proud of the fact that only 10 cents on your dollar, 90 cents went to the cause, but 10 cents they kept for, you know, all the things, bookkeeping, all the stuff you need to do. When they went and they did some research, this was a health charity, and they found out that because their partners were not doing good infection control, they were actually causing more health problems than they were solving. So I would caution people when they look really hard at how much money that charity is spending on administration, you should be as concerned about a number that is too low as you should be concerned about a number that is too high, because you don't want to be in a situation where you want to have a charity that's doing some evaluation. You want to have a charity that's monitoring.
What's a healthy range of numbers?
Well, I think, once again, I'm going to say this is an apples and oranges comparison, and I'm going to use an example that was originally developed by the McKinsey Foundation. And they talked about it's very hard to compare charities even in the same area. So, for example, you have an animal shelter. Well, maybe in Toronto, we're a big city, maybe that animal shelter only takes care of dogs, and there's a different animal shelter that only takes care of cats. And if they have too many dogs, maybe there's another animal shelter nearby. So they can maybe keep their costs low, they can transport animals easily. There's a lot of there's a lot more available to them. You go to some remote and rural community somewhere in Ontario, maybe that shelter is doing dogs and cats and maybe large animals as well. So trying to compare what the costs are going to be for the dogs-only animal shelter in downtown Toronto, which may be able to have a lot of opportunity to keep their costs down, versus an animal shelter somewhere remote and rural, is not really going to be a fair comparison. I think what you want to do as I completely understand that you're asking me for a number range. I think what you need to do instead is look at the organization and look at their financials and feel free to ask tough questions. If they can explain to you, we're in a remote community, people have to travel 3 hours to drop off the animal, so we have a lot of transportation costs, then that's a legitimate reason for why their administrative costs could be higher.
So how much responsibility does the donor bear in knowing where the money that they're giving is going?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess, it's good practice to check, to find information, but I would say the responsibility should be more with the organization soliciting donations to make it very transparent and so on. I very much like the example that I was mentioning about being transparent. Sometimes, maybe we'll talk more about it, there is this idea that you have to minimize overhead costs, that the perfect charity is the one with zero overhead cost. Not so sure about that, because if you have to move around, that distances are high, those expenses are necessary for the cause to be realized, essentially. So being very open, very upfront with where these costs come from, I think is good practice in general. And I guess donors will be responsive to it.
I do think, though, I'm going to see it slightly differently. I do think you have some responsibility as a donor to kick the tires a bit yourself. And I think there are ways, we're all busy people. One thing I think you want to look at proportional to the gift. If a $10 gift is a large gift to you, bear in mind that it may not be a large gift for the charity. So you may not be able to demand that someone meet with you for an hour. If you're thinking about making a large gift, it's perfectly reasonable to ask for a meeting. The other thing is there are a lot of organizations that screen charities and screen them hard. I am a volunteer with Imagine Canada. They have a standards program. We put people through a very rigorous process as part of that. Hospitals are accredited by Accreditation Canada, and the list can go on. My point is that it's useful to look at a charity and see if they hold themselves to a bigger standard, and if they hold themselves accountable to a larger organization than themselves that's external to themselves. That's an awfully good sign. And some of those other organizations are places like United Way and also your local community foundation. Those are all people that will scrutinize the charity. And that maybe saves you a little bit of time when you're trying to decide where you want to put your hard-earned money.
Overhead costs for charities is something that comes up in the news, but something else that comes up in the news is how much the CEOs are paid. And in Ontario, they're paid more than $250,000 a year. Is this a problem?
So I would say when you're looking at that, I think the question is, look at the size of the charity and look at the scope of responsibility for the CEO. If you're a CEO of a $100 million organization and you have operations, in 12 different places in Ontario, so not only do you need to have a tremendous amount of subject expertise about the cause, you also are managing, 12 leases or 12 buildings you own, you're managing human resources remotely. One of the things I would do is suggest, if you're looking at that CEO salary, you can't really expect that for $35,000 a year, that complexity. Look at what would be reasonable for a person running a $100 million business be making in the private sector.
But how can we have $100 million charities? Because the idea of charity is that it's an organization that's trying to help people. But if you're making $100 million as a charity, is it a charity or is it a business?
Well, but I think you're making the assumption then it's not that necessarily a charity's making $100 million and then kind of, keeping the money all to themselves.
But if they have, like you said, their overhead is $100 million.
No, I'm not saying their overhead's $100 million. If their revenue is $100 million, who have large revenues but do great work. For example, health charities who fund research into chronic health conditions. There was a story in the news a few years ago where Heart and Stroke, and in my opinion, extremely responsibly, commits a large amount of money to researchers. They give them a 3-year commitment, which is very valuable in terms of research, and then they hold that money into a reserve. And they got beat up, in my opinion, completely unfairly for having money in their reserve. Well, they're trying to forward their cause, research costs a lot of money. So also bear in mind, charities, I'm not saying $100 million in expenses, charities are also places like universities, places like hospitals. Those are big organizations and they're expensive organizations. We want to have the best care, and a lot of what my colleagues are doing in hospital and university fundraising or in health fundraising, in arts institution fundraising, is raising money, which is then coming back to us and the public in the form of really great hospital equipment, really amazing art, all kinds of really, really great scholarships for students who can't afford school. So that expense, it's a lot of money, but it's going to a lot of good stuff.
Nico?
No, I agree with these points, and we need to think about salary for a charity CEO or anyone else, actually. Both as a way to reward effort, and yes, for some of these organizations, you need to put a lot of hours and mental effort and so on, but also as a selection device. So if you really want a good manager to run an organization and you think that good management is going to help the cause, then money is a good attractor, right? So if you pay more, if you announce a higher payment, then smarter, more competent people are going to be interested in maybe leaving their current jobs and joining the particular charity. It is true that public perception matters. So an example that a colleague of mine always mentions is, suppose you have to take a plane, so you are at the airport and you are in the line for the economy class, and you see the CEO of the charity to which you donate every year, very willingly, very happily, getting into business class, right? And they're like, what? I mean, it's a feeling that many people might have. And so I think managing the public perception somehow is important. But CEOs of large charities work a lot. And if they're smart and competent, well, it's better for the cause. So this is something that we need to keep in mind.
When people donate money, should they have the right to specify how their money is going to be used?
First of all, when you donate your money, you completely have the legal and ethical right to specify how your money is going to be used. I will note that charities also may need to decline your gift. And so I had an experience, I was at a large national health charity, and the person wanted to make a gift that was so specific that we didn't think we would literally ever find a recipient that would match those terms. But absolutely, if you want your gift to go to a specific thing, I'm required from an accounting standpoint to keep that in a separate pool of money. I'm required to only spend it in that way. What I will note for you is, for example, when you're running something like a food program and you say, I only want it to go to, the food. Well, bear in mind that part of what the electricity is paying for is to keep the refrigerators running, and is to make sure that the stoves have electricity or gas to keep running, to make sure that you're living up to certain health and safety standards in terms of food preparation, that your folks have been trained. So when you're thinking about narrowing your donation, you still might want to give a certain amount unrestricted to allow the charity to provide the service in the way in which you want to see it provided.
We only have a few minutes left, but I'm curious to get your opinion on this. We see a lot of celebrities now supporting charities, advocating for them. Does this hurt their cause or does it help them? The charity and I guess the celebrity.
That's a real it depends question. A strong celebrity that's a clear voice, where it's a close connection to what that celebrity cares about and believes in. It's similar to business, can be a great asset for a charity. There's certainly been cases where celebrities maybe had an unfortunate situation in their personal life, maybe involving substance abuse or something, and that can really create a problem for a charity. So just like any charity aligning essentially with a business, sometimes it can be great and sometimes it can be tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. A celebrity, a person you trust and who's credible, is a positive signal. So if that celebrity decides to donate or to support a particular cause, and I don't know much about that cause, that helps me knowing more and to believe and to trust the organization. But yes, celebrities are prone to scandals, and so that might really backfire in some case or change dramatically if some events happen. So it's a little risky, but it could be it could be effective.
Does personal benefit take away from the moral good of giving to charity?
I would say no. At the end of the day, it's what's the money doing. If the money's doing good stuff, then honestly, I don't really care what your motivation is. You're doing good work, and it's important work. And whether you're doing it because you're maybe a social climber, or whether you're doing it out of religious obligation, or because you're an immigrant and you want to pay back Canada, I don't care. You're still giving money that's going to help make Canada better.
I agree. In general, I think there is an old Latin say that money doesn't smell, so if people donate more, the better. It's more of a matter of how much you can rely on certain sources of revenue if their motivations are not as stable or they're very contingent to a particular circumstance. But that's up to the charity to realize that and be probably as broad as possible in their promotion strategies and campaigns.
Nico, Anne, thank you so much for helping us get to the nitty-gritty of charitable giving. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Thanks.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.